Hello, welcome to the Elevate Dataviz show, episode number 7. Woo!
Woo!
We're here to explore current topics in data visualization, share our creative inspiration, and the tools and techniques that we're experimenting with as practicing information designers. Today, we're talking about emotions and does it belong in Dataviz? What role does it play? And how do you actually execute on evoking emotions? I'm Ali Torban, and we have Duncan Gear and Gabrielle Marit here. Before we jump in, this show is supported by the members of Elevate Dataviz Learning Community who get the opportunity to watch and ask questions live. If you would like to do that and you want to level up your Dataviz skills in a supportive community, check out elevatedataviz.com. Okay, so emotion. I should note, if you are watching this live, you can drop questions throughout and ask us questions, and we'll chat about it. This is
just drop them in the YouTube chat.
Yeah, this is an open forum for chat. So I want to share to kick off our conversation, contextualize what I'm talking about when we're saying emotion in data visualization. Andy Cockgreave, he works at Tableau, and he is a co-author of the Big Book of Dashboards. He contextualized this really nicely in a tweet he did recently, and he was talking about all the different levers that you can pull when you are making the thousands of design decisions when you're creating a chart. So do you want someone to understand the chart fast or slow? Is the data sparse or granular? Do you want someone to explore or explain your graphic or your main story? Should it be dry or should it have emotion tied to it? Should it be ambiguous or accurate? So I thought this was a really good way to show that you can. It's not like black or white, whether something is emotional or not emotional. It's on a spectrum first, and it's just one of the many design tools in information communication, like not just Dataviz talking about charts, we're talking about communicating information. And because of that, you do need to be able to have all these different levers that you can pull. It's not like, oh, I just know how to use the tool and some tool where I put Dataviz in and I get a chart out. Since we are communicating information, there's a lot of different ways you can do it. And one of those is using different design elements or like sonification, like Duncan does, in order to pull emotion out of the information and make your reader care more. Any thoughts on that?
I mean, I think it's quite interesting that the slider here goes from dry to emotion. Like I sort of feel like maybe dry to engaging might be a better way of putting it, because emotion is one of several ways that you can use to engage people. It's about getting people to care about something that they might not otherwise care about, right? Something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What were you gonna say something, Gabby?
No, I had the same thought about like why dry. It shouldn't be like neutral versus emotional. You deliver information in the neutral manner, and then otherwise you deliver information in an emotional manner, in a way, or at least in a way that should, trigger your emotion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that could be. I want to show some examples of Gabby's work too, just to show what we're talking about with, hey, this could just be.
Gabby's really good at this.
Oh yes, a bar chart. This could be a bar chart. That's dry.
A lot of bar charts. A whole lot of bar charts.
I mean, this is basically a bar chart, right? But
it's a bar chart, yeah.
You took the emotion slider and brought it all the way over to the what is this? Right.
Is that what you did? You just dragged a slider across?
Yeah.
Drag the slider. Use a little bit of Midjourney, digital painting, and
yeah, I know. I saw your tweet about that. How you used Midjourney for the illustration.
Yeah, actually, could you talk, not to derail us immediately when we've already just
we want to know.
but I think probably some people might not have seen this before if they don't follow you. But it's a really cool chart. It's a very unconventional chart. Could you talk a little bit about this chart and how you put it together, why you put it together, what you were trying to do here in the sense of kind of like it not looking like a traditional bar chart?
Not looking at a chart.
Yeah, why did you pull the slider?
The original data is from a report by Influence Map, and they have this whole analysis, and it's a really big report, but that's condensed in a big table. It's literally a table, it's not even a graph, of they give people a score on how bad your climate policy footprint is, and it's in minus points, right, for negative, and they actually have a whole positive, which is great, which is not what I focused on. And it was just numbers like minus 54, minus 80, et cetera, et cetera. What I found really interesting is when we think about, polluters, we just think about them as like, okay, they're polluting a lot, great, and we give those numbers. But really what's happening is not only polluting a lot, but they want to maintain its status. They want to pollute more. So and the way all policies are now evolving is because they have a hand in the decision, because they have such a lobbying against the planet. So I love that report. And I really wanted to emphasize the fact that it's not just a number of a grade. It's not just a score on how bad you influence a government. It's actually them leading the hand of our policymakers on what type of law they take. So my entire concept was to have this person, the concept in my mind was to have this person representing our actual politics, which are usually white, male, and older. So I had a specific character in mind. And my whole goal was to show the idea of like a shadow with a hand pushing the hand of our policymakers. However, my skills are limited. I can digital paint pretty well, but it will take me forever to do it properly. And I was looking for a certain mood. So I used something called Midjourney, which is a new AI, how would you call that, Duncan? AI design software platform?
It's an AI art tool. There's a few of these available. There's DALL-E, there is Midjourney, there are several others that I can't think of the names of.
Yeah, using Stable Diffusion. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but basically the way they work is you give them a prompt. So you say, I want to see a penguin in an, as an opera singer or something like that. And it will use its database of images that it has collected off the web. And there's a bit of a kind of ethical question mark over how legal it is to harvest all these images off the web, which are in the vast majority of cases copyrighted, and then use them to generate other images. So it has them, it takes the text descriptions, the alt text often that is written for those images.
Oh, really?
And it uses them as descriptions for the pictures. And then it sort of just sends it the other way. So you give it text and it creates a picture for you.
The extra cool part that I have found with using those things is that you can even specify an emotion in there, like happy or sad, and it's interesting to see how it alters it based on what emotion you put in, and it gives you
how
ideas.
It interprets those things.
Yeah, it is really fun to try that.
Yeah, and you can tell them also. So in that case, I was looking for that like shadowy effect type of thing. So I used thing like I wanted a portrait of men. I'm actually looking down right now at what I used, and it takes a couple tries, right?
The prompt.
Yeah, so it takes hours to figure it out, but I can give you the final, which was the portrait man with a suit looking down, sitting at a table, signing a document with large shadows behind him. And then I use specific things that relates to the style I'm looking for. So for this one, because it's all about writing and painting and drafting and this idea of shadows, I actually wanted to look like oil painting, like something dark. So I gave him extra thing, which was contrast, charcoal drawing, texture. And then I usually put ultra high detail and 8K, which is like a little more of like the specific technical terms you use sometimes when you want a really high quality thing. And then I use some very specific things that I'm telling the software is, do I want it to be looking photographic or do I want it to look more like an art drawing or digital painting? So I'm using specific things. And I won't go into detail because it's boring, but about like what do I want it? And so I got the section you're seeing here. It's only the men writing the documents. That's the only thing that comes from Midjourney. And then expanding the artboard, and I created more texture added on top, and then a digital painting that hand that's driving in the same style. So I had to repaint by hand the extra hands that's moving on top, and then those bars. I did the Excel charts of the bars, and then I put it in, and then I digital painted the rest to make it look consistent with the rest and make it an oil painting, because that's what I was looking for. And also the relationship to me in my mind, and that comes down to emotion, was. You know how in America we have the Declaration of Independence and all and also the list of, how do you guys call it? The Constitution. And when you look at the document, it's like an old document with handwriting.
Yeah, it looks like this.
Right, writing with a pen. So even the choice of fonts for me was to recall, not like in a really obvious way, but to recall somewhat people who live in this country, because this is about America, to people who have this like reminding, this like memories trigger. It may not be like super obvious. I don't need to tell them, hey, look, it looks like a constitution. But it was kind of the goal of like kind of this little link, visual link to that thing that they all know, because we all know how the constitution looked like. And that's kind of the emotion thing. I try to find things that relates to the emotion I'm trying to trigger.
I mean, this links in like really closely with a lot of the work that you've done on visual metaphors, right, Ali?
Yeah. As you were saying that, Gabby, that just reminded me the exact same things that I say about visual metaphors, that it just adds in this other layer that you can utilize to add more information that, is subtly communicated, that if you just saw this bar chart, in Excel, you're not getting that extra layer of information like, hey, this is like a small group of people who are, signing into legislation, things that are going to determine your future. I mean, you said all that with just the way that you styled it, and without actually having to say it.
It's exactly that. I think when people think about aesthetic, they think about just making it pretty, right? Where for me, it's actually to add information, more contextual and human and emotional information around the data I'm giving. So I'm giving you data, but I'm going more context. And sometimes I'm making it in a way that may not be obvious. Like I've done something recently, a year ago probably now, on immigration and how it's going to increase, like how the flow of people that needs to be displaced is going to increase due to climate change. And the person that's used, it's a desert, and then you have women and children walking in the desert, and those people are from a photography that I found from the UN, which was taken in Somalia. They are real people that have been displaced from Somalia, which is the country the most impacted currently, that has the more internally displaced people due to hunger, which relates to climate change. So I purposely chose those people and didn't put just random, let's say, American white family walking in the street. I put them in the context of a desertic country, which they are, and I put the exact. And I'm not telling you that. I'm not writing in on the data, but I'm hoping that the visual clues help people kind of put a figure on it and have most of this contextual information.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, here's another kind of one about tobacco and fossil fuels, like from Gabby.
Yeah, I think the visual information is really clear here.
Yeah.
I feel like my sense of your metaphors are way more like complex than my mind. I'm more like, oh, we're talking about cigarettes and tobacco. Let me just put a cigarette. And we're talking about fossil fuel. Let me show you some, pollution happening.
Yeah, well, the colors. It feels very dark, which I think is the point, right? You're communicating.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like. So it feels like there's kind of like, you could describe this as creating a mood almost as much as you could describe it as generating emotions. Like, do you see those, either of you, do you see those two things as the same thing? Are they different things? What is the difference between creating emotions and creating a mood?
That's a good point. Mood. I see them as the same. I mean, not the same, but like cousins.
They're connected. I think they're connected because I was thinking of like typically, for instance, I was looking at, there's an article from the New York Times when there was 1 million deaths. I think COVID's celebratory in the negative way. And what they did is they were showing the data on the number of people, the death number per month, and in between those numbers that we're moving, they had, I don't know if you saw, and it's the text messages, the last text messages exchanged from the people who died from COVID with their families. And it's a very very, very emotional articles. If you ever seen it, it's just, I cried like a baby because it's just like, there's this conversation that's just like, hey, I'm doing better today, getting out of the IC, and then no answer. And then they say, Jose Luis died on, March 3rd, 2019. And which was interesting is the aesthetic is not particularly mind-blowing. It's like an elegant serif. The text messages are put into context again with the mobile version, and you can see the text, yes, but they didn't go particularly hard. They do change the background, there's a bit of gradient happening, but they didn't go too hard. They could have really like made it way more aesthetical. Yeah, you can see the text, so they put the visual clues just like a phone, but outside of that, it's not particularly branded. There's not a particular mood to it. It's a classic New York with a white background, and then so I think I would detach them a little bit. You can use the mood, And you can see the mood changing here with the gradient is actually changing colors with numbers, but it's not as strong as maybe the one we were showing before for me, where like I went really hard in the mood. So I think we can detach them sometimes. Some elements or some approaches can be very emotional without being very heavily aesthetic.
I wonder though, because I feel like the mood of this, I hadn't seen this one actually. The mood of this, it's specifically like what's the word? Like you said, like unremarkable in terms of the styling, but I feel like it's makes it feel like how this is like an everyday, like this could be you just on your phone like you always are looking at text messages, you know?
Yeah, it's intentionally prosaic, if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
And there is some
and that's as much of a
can see
design
the colors
decision
in
as
them.
anything else is.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I kind of see mood as very related to emotion because, you know, when you choose to go to a restaurant based on the ambiance. That's kind of how I see like the, you know, the visual design of like how you do your graphics, Gabby, with, you know, the styling. And let me pull this back up.
Can you talk to us? Can Duncan, because I think it's interesting. I was re-listening recently to the project from Duncan with Valentina on the London Under the Microscope. And there's an obvious, very, I mean, to me, it felt like a very obvious choice of what type of sonification you pick. And, you know, what are those, like the, you know, the baseline of death numbers that's expanding. There's a choice, obviously. You make that music sad and dramatic. So you obviously also had the mood that's not visual, but like sonified. Could you explain it a little bit how you pick those?
Yeah, I mean, so one of the reasons why I really like sonification is that you have so much, what feels like so much of a wider emotional palette in sound than you do in visuals. When you're making a chart, well, actually, just not to like bat it straight back to you, but what are the tools that you kind of use to generate emotion when you're doing visuals, right? It's color, it's photography, typography to some extent, perhaps. What is there anything else that I'm kind of not thinking there?
I think there's a lot of it is texture to me.
Texture is a nice one.
Yeah, texture is very important. And I think more than that, there's also a specific aesthetic of styling where sometimes people think about photography and just slap it on, you know, like put an image right on the Dataviz or aside, and I think we talked about it really recently when we talked about creativity. To me, there's this idea of creating a narrative in a scene, putting it down into a landscape. So it's not just I'm putting those images to make you feel something. I build it together as a scene, almost like in my head, it's almost like a cinematographic scene. So I take a lot of the movie industry. I love it because you go to a movie and by just putting 30 seconds of music with like one specific photographic treatment of the scene, you get the sense of, is it dangerous? Is something going to come out of the closet? Is it a sad? You know right away, and they don't even have to put any like words out of the character's mouth to know to expect something, which may be a problem too, because but I think this is what I refer to. It comes together. And so it's a lot of different texture elements, but also the way I put it together, to me, needs to look like something that's real and tangible, and you can almost like grab it from the screen.
Yeah, and sound is a huge, like in movies. My daughter, she's 6, so like she's very sensitive to like scary things on TV, and nothing scary was happening on the TV, but they started playing like, hey, something scary is going to happen through the sound, like, and she was like, ah, and I was like, nothing's happening, but she was just cued by the sound, like this is going to be scary.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's incredible. Like she's 6, did you say? Yeah, I mean, you know, it's incredible how cultural, like how accultured we get to this at such a young age because we're exposed to so much of it all the time. It's really, really interesting. And one of the things that you can do as an information designer is use those kind of cultural things that are, you know, from whatever culture of the audience that you want to work with. You can use those to generate those emotions, and yeah. So there's lots and lots of ways you can do this with sound. You know, you can use, like, a really simple example would be using minor scales and chords versus using major scales and chords, where minor ones will tend to sound sad and major ones will tend to sound happy. But, you know, there's a lot more kind of like depth that you can explore than just that.
If I may connect that to imagery, it's the same with colors. You can use a blue. People tend to think like, oh, like blue is peace and red is violence. That's not true. Depending on the is it warm or is it cold? That's what indicates, more than even just the color shows, the hue shows. Like, is it red or yellow? You can have a really, like, typically yellow is a great example. It can be sunny and fun and optimistic. But if you make it maybe a little colder, or on the opposite, you merge it with some red, then it becomes threatening, kind of like the image we were looking at. Yeah. So really, yellow, or like attention warning, right? Like,
yeah, and yellow can also be a kind of color of like acid and, you know, radiation or something.
Poison,
like
yeah,
that, you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah, poison, exactly. Green can be radiation, or it can be forests and nature. You know, red can be a heart and warmth and love, or it could be danger. There's
anger.
Like or anger. All of these things work differently in different contexts, but we have these associations, and you can make your work so much more effective by tapping into them. I mean, you know, other ways that you can kind of use sound in interesting ways is, you know, fast things versus slow things. Usually things that are kind of like more mournful tend to be kind of like slower, but slower can also be relaxing, whereas fast paced could be like urgent. There are kind of, you have a huge wide palette, and that's before you start thinking about, you know, using things like echo and reverb to communicate that you're in a large empty space, right, for example, or distortion where something is like, you know, breaking down, or a little like audio kind of things going wrong, or, you know, just things like the crackle of vinyl can make something sound like warm and a little bit old-timey and nostalgic. Exactly. So you have this huge audio palette that you can play with and that you can tap into, and it's really, really fun exploring that and what you can do with it.
Can you comment about, you wrote an article about what is it, a bar chart so long that it hurts? Like,
yeah,
you remember that?
Volume.
Like, how you can use volume too, that in ways that you literally cannot do with visuals.
Yeah. I mean, you couldn't literally hurt someone with a bar chart, but you absolutely could with sonification.
Yeah.
No one has done it yet. Might happen. You never know.
If it does, I am not responsible. I'm just sort of laying this out right
This
now.
is not a challenge.
This is not a challenge, people.
Don't hurt anyone.
No, I mean, you know, the point is that something that is loud can be like actually physically painful. It can generate a physical response in you, not necessarily an emotional response, but a physical response. And that's something that's much harder to do with visuals, I think. Like, that's one of the big differences between the two.
Ben had a good question. Says, do you think data sonification could go more mainstream if it's so good at portraying emotion?
So I like this question because I think in a lot of ways it already has, but we don't think of things as sonification. You know how, like, anytime something turns into mainstream technology, it's no longer artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence only really describes things that are like future technology. But the stuff that we do all the time now, like talking to chatbots, like, you wouldn't really think of that as like AI anymore. But, you know, 5-10 years ago, we were absolutely describing that as AI. I think it's a bit the same with sonification, in that a custom ringtone is sonification. You know, an alarm is sonification. And, you know, alarm clocks are, I mean, maybe they're not necessarily emotional, but maybe you want to kind of like...
Makes you sad.
Or happy. It's a new day, you know?
I made someone who was making sound for big brands. He was making those sounds, the alarm sounds, the little beep that you do if you have your volume on in your phone, it makes like dip when you receive one or you send it. And he was like, there's a whole strategy on making things sound like it got sent versus received. Versus something that wakes you up versus a timer. And it was so interesting. This like 1 second sound that had to be so precise. and branded too, like, which was really interesting. Of like, Apple sounds are very different than Microsoft sounds.
Yeah, there's a fantastic podcast on all the different Windows startup sound effects over the years and how they all differ from each other and the different moods they were going for in each one and how that evolved over the different versions of Windows over the years. I think it's on 20,000 Hertz, which is a fantastic podcast about sound design. Maybe you can dig it out and drop a link in the chat. But the one thing I want to say about this is something that I've said before in other contexts, I think as well, is like one of the most kind of famous examples of like real sonification. I don't know what I mean by real sonification, but it's like literally data as opposed to just information. Is the like heart machines in a hospital, right? The ones that go beep, 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 that communicate the tempo of your heartbeat. And when it's going fast, that's a problem. And when it goes beep, that means the heart stops. And this is it's just like a square wave or something like that. It's a really simple sound, but it is imbued with so much emotion because we see it in a context where people are hurt and people are in danger and people, something is going wrong in the operating theater or something like that. Like, I think it's really, really fascinating that we can have loaded up what is an incredibly simple sound with so much kind of like emotional weight and meaning and everything like that. So the answer to your question, Ben, is I think data sonification is already mainstream, but the mainstream things we don't actually think of as sonification anymore because it's mainstream. It
does seem like one of the barriers for it to becoming more mainstream, or like me using it or Ben using it or someone, is that we need more tools that are easier for the layman to use. Like there's two-tone, I'll drop that in the chat, which I have used before, so it's easy enough for a novice to use. But it is pretty basic. So I do feel like kind of the technology, the assistive technology in order for more people to make sonifications. I think once that starts moving forward, I think then more people can make them themselves.
I mean, of course, like all these kinds of things, it's a bit of a chicken and egg thing that, if there's not a lot of people making sonifications, there won't be that many people making sonification tools, and without the tools, there won't be making sonification. But, this is something that I care about a lot and is the reason why I recently built a module for this like virtual modular synthesizer platform called VCV Rack, which lets you do quite complicated deep sonifications without code. I can find a link to that and drop it in the chat in a minute. But right now, almost all of the kind of the most popular sonification tools, other than two-tone, you generally need to know how to code to do it. But I'm also very, very fond of people using their voices. This is a technique that I learned about from a researcher at the University of Colorado called Jordan Wirfs-Brock, and she's done a lot of work on this about you doing what we like to call punk sonifications. Punk in the sense that you don't need to like buy loads of stuff and learn a coding language or whatever to just make something, to just express some emotion. You can just use your voice. You can use the things around you. You can like bang on a glass or something like that to generate sounds, and then just find a way to differ those sounds in a categorical way. And then you're representing data. It could be that simple.
When you did your Loud Numbers festival, is that what it was called? Festival?
Yep.
Someone, was it Jordan who did that and led like Jordan. It was over like a Zoom call. People were participating in this like live sonification exercise, and it was really cool to see.
And it works surprisingly well. Like we gave a Loud Numbers workshop about a month ago in the Netherlands, and we got the people there to first kind of like do this themselves in like a big group with us, but then to design one of their own in about half an hour, and they all got something raw and like a sketch kind of thing, not like super developed, but they got something that was communicating data that was just using voices. One of my favorites was a team who they sonified the recent meetings that they'd had and how long the meeting was and how useful it was. And I thought that was fantastic. It was just like they would just be like, ugh, or yay, kind of thing, depending on which
yawns,
like how it was. And then the length of the yawn or the length of the yay was how long the meeting was. And I just thought that was like a really simple but immediately human and like connecting.
Yeah, with the yawn is hilarious.
Yeah, exactly. It's slightly entertaining, it's interesting. And I think that this is a problem that we as people who work with data all the time struggle with a lot, which is how do you make a table of numbers feel more human, right? How do you get it to connect with people in a human way? And yeah, it's one of the most effective tools to just be a human making silly noises.
Yeah, and thinking about your day to day, like the text messages and just like the mundane aspect of it, or like you said with the heartbeat monitor. The reason why that does evoke something is kind of like the visual metaphor thing, because it puts you in that situation. If you are listening to a heartbeat monitor, it's probably not a good situation you're in at that point.
Yeah. And this actually brings us back around full circle to the question that Gabby asked me half an hour
20 minutes ago.
Something like that. About London Under the Microscope, the piece I did with Valentina.
I can share that. If I share it, will people be able to hear it? I can try.
We can also leave the link otherwise.
Oh,
yeah. But in the background of it, let's see if this works first.
Okay, I'll try to play it. Let's see. Can you hear it, or it might just be going through my speakers?
No,
it might be going through yours.
No, don't worry about it. We can just we'll throw the link in the chat. Pause this video and click this, and just like listen to a bit of it before you continue.
I'll drop it in.
You paused? I think they're paused. Okay, now hopefully they come back. And now what was I actually going to say?
Sorry.
Okay, now I remember. So in the background of it, as you will all now know, there is a heartbeat sound. It's like da-dum, da-dum, da-dum. And that plays like one heartbeat per second. And that is the rhythm that is throughout the entire piece. It helps keep the pace, and each heartbeat is a day. Like, 1 second is 1 day, one heartbeat is 1 second. And the animation kind of like vibrates in time with that. You can just about see it. And so that makes it really, really easy to kind of like map the data. We just play it at 60 beats per minute, 1 beat per second. And, you have one piece of data for each one of those. And using that very, very human heartbeat sound and having it kind of like just be this constant rhythm in the background, it immediately kind of like draws you in, because we're used to kind of like, when you just sort of like calm down, everything is very quiet and you can just hear your heart beating. Like it kind of immediately gets you to focus and to concentrate and I guess like pay attention a little bit to what is actually happening. It immediately helps, I think, focus the viewer and the listener, but it also serves as a tempo for the track and everything like that. And, there's lots of other sound bits on top of it. It's quite a multi-layered piece. There's cases information, there's deaths information, there's vaccinations, there's movement data, there is like the emergence of new variants. There's like tons of different like layers of sound in there, but they're all over this kind of like steady heartbeat in the background. And I think that's one of the more effective choices that I made when I was putting this together.
Yeah, and seeing the mood too of this.
Yeah.
The how she designed Valentina Deathblow.
Yeah, it's a visual metaphor. Yeah. She's using the virus metaphor, and so she's replacing a virus that's growing, which is really
and this is kind of like a map of London, and the different districts of London that you're seeing that make up the circle that is the thing. And then the spike proteins on the virus are the cases, and I think it might be the deaths over time that build up slowly.
Yeah, the background, how it's like rising up, and that is deaths, I think, right? And it's changing the color, and it almost looks like it's going from like alive to it's now black and white, and almost has this X-ray look. It looks like
you think that it's a kind of you think that it's like a progress bar, and it's just like moving linearly, but it's not. It's moving at a rate that is equal to the death rate at the time.
It's
but
so
I mean, yeah,
interesting,
there's
though.
like a really clear, like, emotional message with this, and yeah, as well as the heartbeat. The other thing that was quite an important thing to pick was the chord, like what notes go into it, and like the intervals between those notes. You have to know a little bit of music theory and have a bit of experience of this to get it. I got Miriam to help me out with that. I was like, Miriam,
quick.
what's a chord that will suit the mood that I am going for on this? And she was like, you should pick this chord. I don't remember off the top of my head what that chord is. So Miriam is my co-host on the Loud Numbers podcast, for people who aren't familiar with that.
I feel like we need to make a whole list of things, of levers that you can pull for emotions specifically, like how you were talking about the chord and the speed. Like, this is from Eric Kennedy. He does UI UX stuff, and he was talking about different levers you can pull to
this is like the list I came up with earlier.
Exactly, typography,
that's
color,
exactly
imagery,
it.
design elements.
The thing that's hard, though, is, for instance, in colors, there's so many variation of what you can play with. Like we were talking about the hue, which is the color itself. You pick purple versus yellow. The saturation, is it towards the gray or is it fully saturated? How do you apply those colors is very important. And so it's so much more than just choosing a color, right? And I think what's difficult for people is that step of, I want to make it nice. I know I can play with color typography, but I actually don't know how to. And I don't know if we have. It's really, because I think, to me, it comes down to practicing this idea of observing how you potentially just yourself or your person around you, your network, feels about, react to specific clues, whether they're visual or sonar or anything else. It could be text, like literally, like just touching. So it's really hard to teach anybody that, because there's no rules of, like, again, red is not always, just violence, or it could be happiness, it could be love. So it's a question of experience and context, and it's also very much local, because geographically we have a different connection with colors and sound anywhere, right? Like I think, maybe for us we think like yellow is money, but if you live in a tribe in South America where they don't have money, they don't use monetary, then they're not going to connect yellow with money.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, some of these relationships are extremely cultural in nature, and others of them are not so much. Like, something that is fast-paced is a kind of something, feels more urgent across cultures. Loud sounds are unpleasant across cultures,
right?
Whereas, whereas other things are extremely cultural in nature, like some of the color things that you just mentioned. I think it's really, really interesting to explore this. I mean, there was like, Jacques Bertin came up with his visual variables. Maybe we need a list of emotional variables.
Yeah, and also, Gabby, I haven't released this episode yet, but when I interviewed you about creativity, I think we were talking about inspiration a lot, and you were talking about how really the first step is to just become aware of how things are making you feel, and then just start breaking it down, being like, okay, this made me feel scared, or this made me feel sad. Like, what about this? Oh, well, because the walls are all black, or because the sound was really low. Like, just start trying to pick apart how you feel in certain situations when you see something, when you hear something, and then that will start giving you the tools to, like a toolbox to pull from. Like, oh, when I'm sad, I want to have a mood of sadness, that I'm pulling this, and this, or happy, I'm pulling this, and this.
In a way, it's a work of data collection, which is kind of interesting. It's data on how we feel, and then identifying patterns of. So we talked in the podcast, and you guys will hear about it in a couple of weeks, I'm sure. But we talked about how this is something that most of us do intuitively, but if we don't practice it, we might not notice. So we stop noticing what color makes us feel. And I take notes. So I go to the movie and I'm like, this scene really shocked me. Like, that was exceptional. I felt really moved. So what was the element within the scene that made me move? Is that the music? Is it how the character was acting, the emotion he was displaying? Is it about the small movement? Is it about the background? Like, was it outside, inside? What was the color? Was that photography treatment where everything is really dark? or is it, there's a lot to it. So I like to take notes of little things and I'll save them somewhere. And then, I have to pull the drawers in my brain of like, this works and this doesn't work. And if you don't know how to do that, you can also just, there's a bias because it's expert looking at art, for instance. But I think there's a lot to be said when looking at interviews of people who create, explaining how they made those choices. Is really important. Or other expert analyzing scenes in movies, for instance, and be like, well, look at that camera work. It helps doing this emotion,
There's tons of great YouTube channels that do this for you. They break it down, like particular scenes, why this is so effective. Like it's well worth going and looking at some of that stuff, because you can use all of those cinematography tricks in information design. And yeah, it's exactly the same set of tricks. There was one comment that I wanted to pull out from a little while ago. Chris Martin posted this. He was trying to think about the use of musical resolution or lack of resolution and emotion, and thought that there's an analogy to visual things, like unresolved visual elements can be unsettling. Oh. I think this is really, really interesting. This idea of, making things unsettling and a little bit uncomfortable by making them slightly broken compared to what you might expect. Have you ever used that kind of technique, Gabby? It seems like something that you might use, some kind of like visual distortion and glitchiness and things like that.
I use it all the time. To be fair, I use it not just to show things that are unsettling and catch your eyes and stuff like that, but I'm also using it as a way to embrace complexity. Even the score thing, it's digital painting, and some people come at me being like, it's not precise enough. I can see exactly the number of the score that they got on the line because I'm not, and it doesn't matter because that's not my point. And I also think the score is a bit wobbly. Like it's a great research, but it's never fully precise. Like it is an estimate that we human make on this kind of data. And it's not perfect. So I don't mind embracing that complexity and actually showing that it's a little messy. Like the behind the scenes are messy. So I think those, and some people do it probably better than me when it's, it's very hand drawn, for instance. Why not? Why not? Of course it's not. And just to be clear, I always start with an Excel that pixel perfect. Like I do. I don't deform the data, but I accept that sometimes creating those elements that are unresolved, or that maybe transform a little bit the preciseness of the data point and how it's presented, is part of the strategy of making it show that complexity and potentially also drive interest.
Communicating the uncertainty.
Yeah, I think it is a wonderful reminder to people too. Like maybe you think that this data is 100% reliable and 100% accurate, but most likely it's not. There's a lot of problems with it, I'm sure. Sonia says, being educated at Design Academy, we also had a course on psychology. It isn't that broadly broadcasted in Dataviz. Should we include it just as we tell people to learn some basics on statistics?
I mean, on the one hand, I want to say, yes, absolutely. On the other hand, I feel like Dataviz is so incredibly multidisciplinary as it is that adding psychology to the mix is just going to make it even harder to learn. But no. Is absolutely right. There is absolutely an element of psychology in the work that we're doing, and you should, if you want to be better at your job, you should learn some of it, of course.
Yeah, communication.
If I may add something, I think there's a lot of that, and there's a lot of frameworks around that, and I think to me it's less about telling people like, how do you make people think the way they think? I think that's experiential and that's really difficult and that's very cultural. But I think what I do agree that this Dataviz is a certain disdain towards aesthetic because whatever, it's just pretty. And I think I wish we could teach people the research behind why the aesthetic is important, because we know that when people take decision, when people interact with information, the first process that's happening is emotion. First, it's an emotional response, and then you have the cognitive process that happens afterwards. So
the analytical response.
Yeah, and it's a research that and I presented a paper recently that somebody has done on climate art. Like they were making during COP27, they made people walk around in front of climate art, people that were raising awareness. And what they realized is when you're being confronted with climate change related artwork, you may want to increase your climate policy support, but that depends more on your relationship, your personal relationship with the subject and the context around you, more than almost the art piece. And that's because it's an emotional reaction. So and then we justify our decision with logic, but it's first an emotional reaction. So people who were, less likely to have any climate change awareness and, empathy towards others and all this type of things that, people that were maybe more, progressive leaning will be like, oh yeah, like the climate art really changed my mind. I want to be even more involved in trying to make some change. Whereas the people that may be from a more conservative background, or may have a different experience of climate change, maybe like, whoa, like those things may be uncomfortable and actually disagree with them and completely disregarded. So I wish we could present more. I think even the paper from Eva Peck, when he goes ask people like, what Dataviz is the most efficient, and the answer is like, my state is not in this map, so I don't like it. Instead of, is the visual working? And I could talk about the paper all day, but that research paper is also very interesting, and it all shows at the end that data is very intimate. The way we perceive information is very intimate, very personal, and so it's great to do good charts. But if the person in front of you can't receive it because of an emotional response, then we need to address that emotional response a different way.
So, are you making an argument that climate art, to be more effective, climate art should be about rich white men drowning rather than anything else?
More than that, I think there's a whole argument about the human being is very selfish. So in the research, when Evan Peck did this research, they went to rural Pennsylvania and asked 42 different people. They showed them a bunch of different graphics on drug addiction, I believe, and there was maps, there was graphics, and the answer they were expecting a bit more of a source issue of like, where does that come from? And if it's the New York Times, I don't care. And if it's someone else, I care. Or maybe more information on like, I don't like this one because it doesn't look good. Like it's using gray and I like red better type of thing. And the answer they got was really, really strange. They were like, well, I like this graph. This graph is the most efficient to me because it talks about drug addiction in this context. And my uncle has this problem with drug addiction. So I feel like I relate to this graph is efficient because it talks about me, something I understand. Or this person was like, I don't like, it was hilarious. I don't like this graph because the United States, when you show them the United States map, literally the answer was like, well, my state, which is whatever, Pennsylvania, is so small here, I can't see it really well on the map. So I think this graph is not efficient. But the graph was about America as a whole and drug addiction in America, but they don't care. All they want to see
is them. See themselves,
Yeah, so we are very selfish. So when not only do you want to like show people what maybe rich people, drowning, but more than that, you want to give them an info on like the financial aspect of climate change, because that's what they care about. They don't care about, they're not going to drown. They're privileged and they know they're going to be okay physically. But if you tell them you're going to lose money, then they might start thinking, yeah. And so it's not only about how we display information, but also what type of information we show, what type of message it is, and who delivers it. Is it the government giving you information that might not go well, or is it your friends?
Yeah. So the takeaway here, I guess, is for the audience that you want to persuade, figure out what's going to cause an emotional response in them and depict that.
That's funny. What you just said, Gabby, about, what's going to affect you, because I saw a commercial actually recently. I think it was by some sort of oil company or something, and they were like making the case that a lot of things you use have oil in them. So it had this lady, this like, maybe someone my age, white lady, just like at the hair salon, and her hair, she was getting her hair dyed, but I guess hair dye has some, ingredient in it that it would go away. So then her hair goes all gray. Just like, see, they're showing you what you would care about.
They're good at their jobs, they're very well paid.
Job. Yeah. And I think it's what I would like to is more data vision. We teach them how to make best Dataviz, but we don't teach them the marketing and the kind of what I think Sonia was talking about, the psychology of it. There's very well-researched things on how do we convince people, how do we influence people. And it's used in marketing mainly, which is so sad. Because it's not great, you can buy more product, but we wish we could. Most of us wants to create change, in a direction another, or inform people in a way that helps them make better decision. And if we don't take into account this whole research and those processes, I think we're gonna fail. And we do. Like COVID is a great example of. Oh my God, can I talk about another research paper? I'm sorry, I have a great one. The FTC awareness, the flatten the curve Dataviz charts that was made, I think, was that Financial Times or The Economist? There's a study that went and got a sample of 500 people, small study, so taking into, but they were asking them, how many of you are aware of that FTC, the flatten the curve charts, and 75%. And then they asked them, are you more likely to take, social distance, to social distance after being aware? And the answer was no. And the other thing they asked them is, okay, so after seeing this chart or being aware of it, what did you think? And what they realized is it actually, the impact of this graph wasn't so much about people taking more precautions, but they creating a mistrust in the government, because the entire chart was about personal individual action to handle the crisis. There was nothing about the government acting here, right? So one of the insight was it's statistically correlated with mistrust to the government and experts, because they're telling you're in charge of this crisis and we can't do anything about this. And so it created like an opposite effect that I don't think the person who made those, and I feel really bad, and it's a small paper, and I can give you a link, but I just find it really interesting how we people with the data, I think people are going to interpret it a specific way. And they have a complete interpretation, and sometimes they understand the information, but then the action that's attached to it is very different than what we would expect.
It makes our job seem impossible.
Before we've only got about 10 minutes left. So before we get to the end, I did want to ask one, devil's advocate question, which is, what do you lose by loading up your work with all of these kind of emotional layers on top of it? What do you lose in that process?
There's a whole segment of people that will see a chart, and if there's any kind of styling to it, will think, nope, that's fake, that's not reliable, just won't even pay attention to it. I feel like that's the huge elephant in the room in terms of, should you be doing anything to your Dataviz?
I see another one. There's that one, obviously. That's the one that don't like my work. Fair game. We can't please everyone. I think I see another one, which is, are we driving when I do my work and I influence people emotionally? Am I driving too hard? Am I deciding how they should feel about a specific subject? And am I pushing people too much? And again, sometimes there's a drawback to it where people could do the opposite of, like, you trying to tell me I should feel this way and I don't want to feel this way, so pushing them towards another extreme. So to me, that's the biggest drawback, is, are we doing that, are we doing that in a way that still respect free will of letting people explore it that a way that they want to, and not force them down this road of, you should feel this way, but the specific point, and that's the action you should take.
Yeah. And I totally agree. I feel like that's a lot of the reason why people say, like, oh, you shouldn't do that because you're swaying people with this data. But I kind of see it as, you obviously have to know your audience and where your graphic is going. You can see this in the news section. People cite numbers all the time in the opinion section. People also cite numbers all the time in, just the straight news section. And they have charts that are just like, here were the numbers, in and out. And then, you have the opinion section, and they can be take a little bit more artistic license with the emotion and stuff. So you kind of just have to know who your audience is and what the perception is going to be, because this is communication. So why wouldn't you be able to use numbers to communicate it just through graphics rather than just through an article?
Which comes down a lot to, I think, who is your audience and what you're trying to achieve. If you're just trying to let people explore it, I give them a dashboard. We don't need emotion on that. If you're trying to influence a specific population to do a specific behavior, then you might need to actually go hard on the emotional aspect. I think it comes down to the brief.
Yeah, and I think you do have to be careful on this when you do have a very broad audience, because a broad audience contains a much larger diversity of people, and you could end up with people having an emotional response that you don't want from it. Like, the example I'm kind of thinking of is, it's a sonification one that I've mentioned a couple of times in the past, which is, there was a really, really great sonification. It may have been a New York Times one of, it was in the wake of, I think it was a mass shooting in Las Vegas, where there was a bump stock involved, which is a way to make a firearm shoot faster, basically. And they wanted to show the difference in fire rate between a regular gun, one with a bump stock, and then like an automatic weapon or something like that. And this is something that sonification is quite good at, like the rate of something compared to a visual. And what they could have done is they could have used literal gunfire sounds to represent this. They did not do this, and I think that was absolutely the right decision. They just did clicks instead. They chose very, very deliberately not to laden it up with these extra emotional resonances, because it would have been incredibly hurtful to people who've lost a loved one through gun violence in that process. And so I think when you've got, if you're wanting to kind of like wield this emotional power, you have to do it with responsibility and remember who could be hurt by you doing so.
Absolutely. And if people want to look at visually, we call that trauma porn, which is when people post videos of, Black people getting killed by the cops, etc. It's you traumatizing over and over and over a community that's already traumatized by the action itself. So I totally agree with that. You'll never see me use blood type of like gore imagery. I don't use those for a specific reason, not even for like animal stuff. I just don't use it because I think you tend to you're going to harm people on the way. But that should be even something to take into consideration for anything. Like, what data do I choose? Can the way I present that be misinterpreted by someone in a way that's harmful to the community? Is so important. There's so many questions, but aesthetic is definitely, I think people tend to go to visual metaphor that are very immediate, the way I do, but without taking that into account. So that's actually a really good point you're making.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't want to, like, through the process of saying that, I don't want to scare people off from trying this emotional sort of stuff. I think probably the message is test it with other real human beings.
Yeah.
Put it in front of somebody and say, what does this make you feel? And find out if that is the kind of, if that is the emotional response that you want, or is it too strong, or is it like not enough, and then adjust from there. That's probably the key message. Always be testing.
I've seen people like post on Twitter like, hey, here's a graphic that I did, and people be like, this is too much, like you really went overboard on that. So
go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, I think it's worth it because people will tell you like that was too much.
Because we fell into that, there's just one more question I like to raise is, we all like to take data about social change, that impact others, because I think most people want to do good in this world. But I think there's another question, which is, am I the right person to do that graph? And it goes hand in hand with, what do I use? And this subject that I stay away from, because I don't think I'm the right person. So at the end of the day, we information designer we're not the voice. We are just a translator. And I think we need to keep that in mind at all time. We're not the person like raising awareness, really. We're just transmitting information from someone else. So are we the right person, and are we doing the right way? Which is what Duncan was raising, even aesthetically.
Yep, that makes sense. All right, so use emotion, but carefully and strategically. And pull back when you need to, and test.
Yeah, with a little bit of taste, I guess.
Yes,
and,
with taste. Emotion with taste.
Yeah, and I mean, that's such a, I don't know, like a get out clause, because just have taste. It's fine.
It's not taste, it's with care. I think that's the question.
Yeah, actually, care is a much better way of putting it. You're absolutely right. And as you say, just test on people and say, is this too much? Is this not enough? Like, try and calibrate it with somebody who, or a couple of people who are as close to the audience for the piece as you want. And maybe also some people who are slightly outside the audience, if you can, because they're going to respond to it differently. And it's important.
They probably end up seeing it.
Yeah, if they're going to end up seeing it, then it's important to know how they're going to respond to it as well.
All right. Well, thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for the great questions and comments. And I hope you enjoyed this conversation about emotion and Dataviz. And join us in 2 weeks for another episode of the Elevate Dataviz show. Bye.
Yay.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.